Assalamu alaikum. Is God a single unshared reality, or can divinity be divided internally? Does faith deepen through mystery or through coherence? And when we speak about God, are we preserving truth or extending language beyond its limits? When the Qur'an rejects the doctrine of the Trinity, it does not do so to diminish Jesus, Prophet ʿಈsā alayhi salam. It does so to protect him and to protect faith itself. The Qur'an does not argue against Jesus. It speaks through him, restoring both divine unity and prophetic dignity. At the heart of this episode is tawḥīd, absolute oneness of God. Tawḥīd is not merely a theological claim. It is the foundation of coherence in belief and clarity in worship. When tawḥīd is compromised, confusion does not remain abstract. It shapes how we love, how we fear, and where we direct our devotion. To frame this correction, the Qur'an states in Surah al-Mā'idah, that is Surah number 5, verse 73, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَةٍ وَمَا مِنْ إِلَٰهٍ إِلَّا إِلَٰهٌ وَاحِدٌ. They have certainly disbelieved who say, Allah is the third of three. There is no God except the one God. This verse is not a polemic. It's a clarification, a refusal to reconcile divine unity with internal plurality. The Qur'an's method here is deliberate. It allows Jesus to speak for himself, disciplines the language used about him, restores the coherence of divine unity, and only then returns belief to its lived consequences in the heart. So in this episode of reflection, we explore how the Qur'an corrects the doctrine of the Trinity by restoring the true position of Jesus as servant, messenger, and sign, not a divine partner. Why divine unity, as understood in the Qur'an and articulated in al-Mīzān, cannot accommodate internal plurality, and how tawḥīd restores coherence to faith by harmonizing reason and revelation, shaping worship, humility, and inner freedom. Before theology advances its arguments, before metaphysics enters the conversation, the Qur'an grounds its correction in testimony. It does not speculate about Jesus. It does not reconstruct history. It does something far more decisive. It allows Jesus himself to speak at the one moment when all claims are finally stripped of ambiguity. This is not incidental. In Tafsīr al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāqqī draws attention to the Qur'an's method here. When an error has grown large through generations of repetition, the most direct correction is not abstraction but shahādah, witness. And so the Qur'an stages a moment beyond history, beyond debate, beyond inherited belief, the day of judgment. On that day, God addresses Jesus directly in Surah al-Mā'idah, verse 116. And when Allah will say, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say to the people, take me and my mother as gods beside Allah? The question is not accusatory, it is clarifying. It gathers centuries of doctrine into a single unambiguous inquiry. Did this claim originate with you? Jesus' response is immediate and striking in its composure. قال سبحانك ما يكون لي أن أقول ما ليس لي بحق ما قلت لهم إلا ما أمرتني به أن اعبدوا الله ربي وربكم. He will say, glory be to you. It is not for me to say what I had no right to say. I say to them only what you commanded me. Worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. Several layers of meaning unfold here, and al-Mīzān insists that none of them are accidental. First, Jesus begins with tasbih, subhanaka. Before defending himself, he clears God of any association, any confusion, any shared status. This is not rhetorical humility, it is theological precision. Second, he explicitly denies haqq al-qawl, the right to speak such a claim. Divinity is not something one may assume, request, or accept. It belongs exclusively to God. Third, he grounds his mission in al-amr, divine command. I said only what you commanded me. His authority is mediated, not intrinsic. His role is prophetic, not ontological. Here, the Qur'an restores Jesus to his true identity, abd, servant. In Quranic theology, servanthood is not a reduction, it's an elevation. To be an abd is to be entirely oriented towards God, without claim to independence or self-subsistence. This is the decisive correction. The Qur'an does not say Jesus was misunderstood. It shows that Jesus himself never claimed what later theology attributed to him. And this testimony occurs not in the heat of polemic, but in the stillness of judgment, where truth no longer competes with power, tradition, or emotion. Reflect for a moment. Imagine that moment, stripped of history and doctrine, no councils, no followers, syllabus, no inherited creeds, only God and a servant answering with clarity. If honor lies in obedience rather than elevation, how should spiritual greatness be measured? Al-Mīzān describes this passage as a tabriyah, a complete clearing of Jesus from the charge of divinity. The deviation lies not in revelation, but in what followed it, not in Jesus' words, but in how later generations spoke about him. And notice something else. The Qur'an does not accuse Jesus' followers here. It does not trace blame. It simply recenters truth. By allowing Jesus to speak, it restores balance without humiliation for Jesus and for those who sincerely loved him. Because the Qur'an's goal is not to win an argument, it is to return faith to coherence. With this foundation restored, the Qur'an can now move forward constructively to clarify who Jesus is, once exaggeration has been removed and devotion purified. That is where we turn next. With Jesus' own testimony now established, the Qur'an moves to the constructive task clarifying who Jesus truly is. The Qur'an does not correct an error and leave a void. It rebuilds identity with precision, restoring balance without diminishing honor. At the center of the Quranic portrait is the title Abd, servant of God. In Quranic theology, servanthood is not a reduction. It is the highest form of orientation towards God. Ubudiyyah signifies complete dependence on God alone, and therefore freedom from dependence on anything else. To be an abd is not to lack dignity, but to possess coherence. This is why the Qur'an honors its greatest figures, prophets and messengers, with this title. Jesus stands firmly within this tradition. Closely linked to this is the title Rasul, messenger. Jesus is entrusted with a message, not its source. A Rasul speaks with authority, but that authority is mediated through Amr, divine command. As al-Mīzān explains, prophetic authority is instrumental, not essential. The messenger conveys truth but does not embody divinity. Confusing these two is where theological distortion begins. The Qur'an then uses two descriptions that later theology would misunderstand: Kalimah and Ruh. Jesus is described as Kalimatum minhu, a word from God. In Quranic usage, Kalimah refers to God's creative command, be, kun, not an eternal logos sharing divine essence. Jesus is created by the word, not identical with the word. The phrase marks the mode of his creation, not the nature of his being. Similarly, Jesus is described as Ruhun minhu, as spirit from him. Here again, the language is relational, not ontological. Ruh signifies divine support, life and honor, and the expression minhu denotes origin and nearness, not division, partition, or a piece of God. God is not divisible, and nothing literally emerges from him in that sense. Reflect for a moment. Notice the Qur'an's restraint. Jesus is elevated but never absorbed into divinity. Ask yourself, why does devotion so often struggle with limits? Why does reverence feel incomplete unless it exaggerates? The Qur'an carefully distinguishes between tashrif, honoring, and ta'lih, diving. Jesus is honored profoundly. His birth is miraculous, his mission noble, his moral stature exemplary, yet the Qur'an never allows honor to slide into divinization. That boundary safeguards both God's uniqueness and Jesus' integrity. What does it actually mean for God to be one? The Qur'an answers this question with extraordinary economy and depth in a chapter so brief it can be memorized in seconds, yet so decisive that it reshapes all theology. Surah al-Ikhlāṣ, Surah number 112. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, He is Allah the One, Allah the Absolute. He neither begets nor is begotten, and there is nothing comparable to Him. At first glance, these verses appear simple, yet in Tafsīr al-Mīzān, ʿAllāmah Ṭabāṭabāʻī emphasizes that their simplicity is deceptive. Each line closes a door that human speculation repeatedly tries to reopen. The word ahad does not mean one in a numerical sense. It signifies absolute singularity, a unity that admits no division, no composition, and no internal plurality. Numbers apply only where multiplicity is possible. God is not one among others. He is one in a way that excludes comparison altogether. This is reinforced by the description of Samad. Samad denotes absolute self-sufficiency, the one upon whom all things depend, while He depends on nothing. From this perspective, the problem with doctrines like the Trinity is not intent or devotion. It is internal plurality introduced into what must, by necessity, be indivisible. Once internal multiplicity is admitted, divine unity becomes becomes a slogan rather than a reality. Al-Mīzān stresses that this is not a uniquely Islamic concern, it is a philosophical one, and any theology that wishes to preserve divine necessity must reject internal composition. Here, revelation and reason converge, not diverge. The power of Sūrat al-Ikhlāṣ lies precisely in this restraint. It says only what must be said and nothing more. In doing so, it preserves the intelligibility of faith. God remains utterly transcendent yet fully present, beyond comparison yet immediately relevant. With divine unity now clarified as both revealed and necessary, the Quran prepares us for the next question, not about God but about us. That is where we turn next. The Quran never allows theology to remain suspended in abstraction. Every clarification about God ultimately returns to the human being, to the heart, the will, and the way one lives in the world. Tawḥīd, therefore, is not only a statement about divine reality, it is a force that reorganizes the inner life. When the Quran insists that God is one, it is quietly asking another question. What then do you live for? Pause here for a moment. What quietly governs your inner life right now? Fear of loss, need for approval, desire for control, or trust in God? This is why Tawḥīd is not merely theological, it is existential. A heart that recognizes one ultimate reality is not pulled endlessly between competing claims. It acts with humility because it knows it is not self-sufficient. It acts with courage because it knows no created power is ultimate. Jesus, Prophet ʿಈsā himself embodies this clarity. His life, as prescribed in the Quran, is marked by obedience, trust, and surrender. His honor lies not in exception, but in alignment. He does not draw devotion towards himself. He redirects it toward God. In this sense, the Quran does not diminish Jesus by rejecting divinity. It restores him. He is freed from claims he never made and elevated through servanthood rather than absorption into God. This is the Quranic pattern more broadly. The highest human state is not fusion with the divine, but orientation toward him. Nearness is achieved through obedience, not ontological elevation. As al-Mīzān emphasizes, when Tawḥīd is properly understood, it produces a distinctive moral posture, humility without self-erasure, confidence without arrogance, devotion without distortion. The believer stands before God neither inflated nor diminished, but rightly placed. In the end, the Quranic refutation of the Trinity is not merely a theological correction. It is a protection of God's uniqueness, of Jesus' integrity, and of the believer's clarity. When God is truly one, the heart no longer needs to be many. That is the quiet power of Tawḥīd. So finally, before we close, let me draw together a few final reflections from this episode, not as arguments to remember, but as orientations for the heart. What the Quran restores here is not only theological clarity, but spiritual balance. Jesus is honored without being divinized. God is affirmed without internal division. Faith is preserved without contradiction. Tawḥīd, as the Quran presents it, is not a narrowing of belief, it is a freeing of it. When God is truly one, devotion becomes coherent, worship becomes sincere, and the heart is no longer pulled into competing directions. In the next episode, we turn to one of the most enduring and delicate questions in Islamic theology. If God is sovereign over all things, where does human freedom truly lie? Are we compelled by divine will or entrusted with genuine choice? And how does the Quran navigate between compulsion, delegation, and responsibility without collapsing into contradiction? I look forward to continuing the reflection with you. Until next week, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.